Happy Monday! Welcome back to Drinking by My Shelf. My name is Emma, and today I'm going to be reacting to my 5-star predictions that I made last summer. So back in June, I filmed a video sitting outside in the glorious heat. Remember heat? I don't remember what heat feels like anymore. And I talked about like 7-ish books that I predicted were going to be 5 stars. I have now finally read all of those books, and I will say that I don't think any of them were 5-star reads, but some of them were still really good. So I'm actually going to rewatch that video now and see what I originally said about each book, like why I thought it was going to be a 5-star read for me, and then we can react and discuss why it didn't quite hit the mark, if it didn't, or what I did like about it. Okay, so the first book from that list that I thought I was going to love was the book Akin by Emma Donoghue, and this is what I said about it. Emma Donoghue is this amazing writer. This sounds just very moving, really. So this is about an old man who suddenly gets custody of his great nephew, or like some connection like that, and they don't really know each other and they have very different lives. And this old man was just about to go on a trip to France to like trace his family history, and he ends up having to take this little boy with him, and it's about them bonding, and I love that kind of shit. So this sounds like it will make me cry and be a 5-star read, especially written by Emma Donoghue. Okay, so you know what? I'm actually going to take this back. I think that was a 5-star read. I initially gave it a 4 because, I don't know, I'm really arbitrary with the way I give out 5 stars. I've said this before, but I think that deserved to be a 5-star read. That actually was a completely beautiful book. Emma Donoghue is such a wonderful writer, as I said, like everything I've read from her is fantastic. And I think this book was so lovely because it was very emotional. It was kind of the heart-wrenching story that you would predict from hearing that synopsis, but it wasn't cliche because it wasn't this kind of suddenly neatly wrapped up happily ever after. We follow this old man and his, I think it is his grandnephew, who their families are estranged. They don't know each other. They come from hugely different backgrounds, different experiences, and so bonding is really hard for them at first, but they do find ways to connect. But it's not just this magical, like, click your fingers and they love each other and everything's wonderful. It continues to be difficult. It felt very real. So there were some very heartwarming moments where they do manage to connect, and the older man does manage to make the younger boy feel loved and safe in some ways. But they also know that this isn't a permanent solution, that the young boy has lots of struggles ahead of him. So it's just this really nice, like, small familial bond that offers something to each of them in their lives, that adds a little extra something to each of them in their lives but doesn't solve their problems. So yeah, it was like Tracy Beaker but more kind of wistful and realistic and heart-wrenching for grown-ups. Okay, the next book I predicted would be 5 stars was Of Murder, Muses and Me, so this is what I said about that one. I just think it looks brilliant. So it looks like a kind of funny, witty murder mystery that's also about writers. I love anything where books and writing are part of the story in a book. So it's about a best-selling author who is found dead in his studio, and our main character is this girl Rosalind, who was a devoted fan of his, and she starts the investigation. It takes her to London, to the heart of the publishing industry, where she encounters an intriguing cast of characters. This sounds like it has everything I love in a book. Okay, so I wasn't wrong about that one. It did have all of those elements that I like. It was very quirky and fun, and it was all centered around books. But I didn't fall in love with it enough to give it 5 stars. And I can't quite put my finger on why. I don't think I could quite put my finger on why when I was reading it as well, but it was just so weird. And I love weird books, so having like a weird plot or a kind of surreal setting like that doesn't put me off. But all of the characters in this book were so strange that I felt a little bit thrown out of the story sometimes. They were completely unpredictable as humans because they didn't really feel like real humans. I think that was the problem. So I still really enjoyed it. It's very funny, it's very twisty-turny, it's really entertaining, like fast read, but it was just so bizarre that I wouldn't necessarily go on to recommend it to more people. Which, now that I think about it, is a lie, because I actually have explicitly recommended it to my friend, but I did recommend it like with the disclaimer that it was a bit odd. I definitely did like it though. I think I did give it 4 out of 5 stars overall because I did really enjoy it, but it just didn't have that like magic spark for me. Okay, the next book on this list, a very interesting one, is Trust Exercise by Susan Choi. So this is what I said about that book. I chose this one randomly on Waterstones a few months ago, and it was only after I chose it and bought it I then let myself look on Goodreads and saw that the reviews were so bad.
But I didn't let it put me off, because I just feel like I'm going to have an unpopular opinion and like this book, because it so sounds like my kind of thing. So it's about two teenagers at a performing arts school who I think become kind of obsessed with their really charismatic drama teacher, who initiates them into a dangerous game. So we learn about them then, but we also catch up with them 20 years later and find out the real story of what happened, kind of from a new perspective. I love that kind of thing. I don't see how this is going to end up having bad reviews.
Should have listened to the reviews. This is a weird one though, and I found it a very hard book to rate, because ultimately I didn't like it, I didn't enjoy it, but I also kind of loved it and thought it was the cleverest thing I've ever read. Even when I just finished it and like had really had to push my way through this book of not enjoying it, so I definitely knew it's not actually a 5-star read, I still closed it and was like, I kind of want to give that 5 stars because the concept was so clever. It just wasn't done well enough. So ultimately I ended up giving it like a 2. I really did not enjoy this book. The reason that it could have been 5 stars is because I did love the way there are actually 3 different perspectives in it. In that synopsis, I mentioned 2. There is a third one right at the end. And each time we change perspective, we rehear parts of the story that we've already heard, but we're hearing somebody else's view of them. We're hearing a little bit more of the truth. And it's not like one of them is wrong and one of them is right. We're just adding in different interpretations and getting kind of closer and closer to what one person's truth might have been and why other people might be lying to themselves about what happened. And what happened was this terrible abuse of power in a school. There is a teacher, and we don't know which one, because depending on which perspective you read, it kind of shifts the blame to somebody else, and it's hard to explain why. It is quite clever in the book of like which characters they wanted to believe that they trusted and which ones they wanted to create as the bad guy. But we do know that there was a teacher at this school who did sexually assault some of the students and kind of groom some of the students, and there was this, really terrible abuse of power going on to these vulnerable students. And the way that story was told was very, very clever. But the reason that I didn't give it 5 stars, and in fact didn't really like it at all, is the way it was written was so annoying. Like, so annoying. I don't mind kind of pretentious writing. Like, I loved The Secret History. I'm okay with some pretentious characters. But this was a whole other level. The whole thing felt very, very caught up in, like, the act of storytelling, and it was really hammering that point home, especially when you get to the first point where it like first twists perspective. It suddenly becomes so repetitive, these sentences that are really just hitting you over the head so many times, like explaining to you that we are now hearing a new perspective of the same characters. And I got to the point where I just wanted to scream, like, I get it, it's very clever, I get it, please don't tell me again in this same sentence. It was a very strange, bizarre book, and I can see why it didn't have good reviews, but I didn't just like outright hate it. I have this really strange like connection to this book that I still like don't want to diss it, and even though I didn't like it, there's still a part of me that's like, it's kind of a 5-star book though, because it was so clever. I think the approach was amazing. Is it my favourite book of all time? I don't know. Okay, the next book in this list was The People in the Trees by Hanya Yanagihara. This is what I said about that one. This next one is the one I am most uncertain about, but hopeful about, and that's The People in the Trees by Hanya Yanagihara. So this is the same author of A Little Life. I absolutely loved A Little Life. I know it's a very, very divisive book on BookTube. Some people hate it. It's very long and very sad, which isn't for everyone. I really, really liked it. But this book, vaguely speaking, it's about a doctor who goes on this expedition and encounters a strange group of people who live in the trees who appear to have attained immortality. And then it's about like the misuse of power when different cultures collide, and the fact that he finds these people and then like uses them for his own gain and fame and everything. I hope that it will be a 5-star read and I will love it just as much as A Little Life, and hopefully it'll be less devastating than A Little Life. There's a chance that I just like won't quite gel with it, or I will absolutely become obsessed with it. I did not absolutely become obsessed with it. I did not gel with it. I did not like it. And oh, you sweet summer child who thought it wouldn't be as devastating as A Little Life. It was incredibly devastating. So yeah, I didn't like this book, but it is a weird one because I didn't like it for basically all of the exact reasons why I know lots of people don't like A Little Life. and I loved A Little Life. I did give that one 5 stars. It was devastating. It was, completely emotionally heart-wrenching, but I thought it was beautiful and strangely hopeful. And I've talked about this book before. I loved that book. The People in the Trees was just miserable. And it's interesting that I felt that way, because actually when you put it all down on paper, there isn't as much like incessant awful things happening throughout The People in the Trees as there is in A Little Life. But I think one of the main differences is that in The People in the Trees, you are inside the head of this awful character who is doing these terrible things, which is something that I love in books. I do like being inside like morally grey characters, or even like outright terrible characters. But this guy was so cold that it made me feel very sick. So the book is actually written quite boringly, I found. So it's kind of this autobiography, like a fictional autobiography of this scientist, and we have annotations and footnotes the whole way through from another scientist who like really, really looked up to him and respected him, even after we know right from the beginning that this scientist is going to be accused of sexual abuse and put in prison for this, but this scientist who really respects him thinks that that's completely irrelevant. So basically we're hearing from two men whose idea of morality does not line up with mine, and then we get this rather cold retelling of the way our main character scientist completely exploits this group of people, the inhabitants of this island that he comes across, and brings them back to the US with him for research and treats them completely unethically. And then it's only right at the very, very end, literally in the last few pages, that the sexual abuse that we hear about from the beginning is properly addressed. And that was really just the clincher for me. I hadn't been enjoying the book, and then I got to the end and was like, I actually might be sick. Like, it's incredibly horribly written, but not in a bad way, like objectively bad. I would say, critically speaking, it's a very good book. It's a very moving book. It really makes the point that it's trying to make. So if I was a reviewer, I would give this one an objective, very high rating. But that's not what I am. I'm just telling you about my personal emotional responses to books, and A Little Life really resounded with me in a way that this one didn't. This one just made me feel sad, nauseated, and uncomfortable, and so ultimately I did not rate it highly for me at all. Okay, next on the list I had The Harpy by Megan Hunter. So here's what I said.
The Harpy by Megan Hunter, which is about a husband and wife, and the husband has an affair, and so they agree that kind of in exchange, in order to get their relationship back on equal footing, the woman, the wife, is allowed to hurt him 3 times. She, as part of this revenge, actually starts going through this like transformation into almost like a mythical creature. It says on the back that it's a dark fairy tale, and that's always a buzzword that I love. I just think it's gonna be 5 stars, you know?
Okay, so this is an interesting one because I actually really want to reread this book. I read it very quickly. I was very gripped. I was very engaged. I was really enjoying it. But then I got to the end, and for some reason, like, just didn't feel that spark of like, oh, that was a 5-star book for me. I just kind of put it down, was like, okay, and then moved on. And I actually didn't love it as much as I really loved the author's first book, The End We Start From, which did kind of just connect to me a bit more. The Harpy is a book I have kept thinking about, and it's a book I definitely want to revisit. And I think actually if I read it again a little more slowly, I might fall in love with it a bit more, because I was expecting this kind of transformation of the woman into this mythical creature. I was expecting to see that happening more throughout the book, and that isn't quite what happened, or at least that isn't quite how I interpreted it. We do get these references to the creature of the Harpy throughout the book, but because maybe I read it so quickly, it felt like it was normal contemporary story, getting quite dark, but just, realistic, and then suddenly at the end, this rather bizarre, surreal twist. And I kind of suspect that if I reread it again more slowly and took my time with it, I would find more hints along the way of what was happening. I might be wrong, but I think that's what I would find. So it wasn't a 5-star. I actually think at the time just gave it a 3-star, because while I did really enjoy it, I got to the end and was like, okay, but it is definitely a book I want to revisit. And like I said, I kind of suspect that I could rate this one more highly if I just gave myself like a better environment for reading it. And then finally, the last book on this list was The Next Step in the Dance by Tim Gautreaux, which I only just read. You would have just seen me summarise it in Balancing the Books, so if you just watched that video, you'll know what I'm going to say. But let's do this anyway. Let's see what I originally predicted about this book.
And then finally, my last prediction is The Next Step in the Dance by Tim Gautreaux, and it's about this couple in a small town in Louisiana. I love small town stuff with people with big ambitions and whether or not they'll be able to escape from their community and from their past. I love that kind of thing. And in this book, it's this married couple, Paul and Colette, who I think are like very kind of popular and well known within this small town, but it's only the wife who has these ambitions of escaping and actually realising that her husband is so kind of ingrained into this community. And what are they going to do?
It did have those elements. I do like small town stories. I do enjoy stories of people feeling like trapped, having ambitions that they don't know if they can fully realise. So it had those elements, but unfortunately I actually DNF'd this book, so I didn't end up giving it a final rating. I read like 3/4 of it or even more before I realised I just wasn't that engaged, I wasn't that interested, and so I put it down. And I think the reason for me is books like that work really well because I love character studies, but I only love character studies if I'm interested in the characters, and for some reason I just couldn't quite engage with these particular characters. I was more interested in Colette, the wife, than I was in the husband, and we spent a lot more time, especially in the first half of the book, we spent a lot more time in the husband's head. The wife leaves, she goes off, she tries to pursue her dreams, and the sections when we follow that happening were the sections I was enjoying the most. When we're just stuck with the husband back in the small town, I just wasn't quite connecting to him. And also, I mentioned in Balancing the Books that the story I felt got very bogged down in the descriptions and in the detail. So we're getting a lot of descriptions of his work with machinery, which I just wasn't interested in. What I wanted to read was about his feelings. Why was he not ambitious? What did he love about this town? I wanted to learn that from him. I wanted to really learn what he thought of his wife's dreams. Did he think they were stupid? I wanted to understand that more, but I felt like all of that was kind of just hidden in amongst his daily activities, and I wanted to spend more time like actually in his head. And maybe he just wasn't thinking these things. It felt like he was slightly avoidant of exploring these thoughts, which is a realistic thing, that is how some people cope with things, that is how some people think, but it's just not what I wanted to read. So yeah, the bits I was enjoying the most were when we follow the wife off pursuing her dreams and seeing the ways in which she is held back, and it was very sad seeing the ways in which she's judged because of the small town she comes from and how she can't escape it. And she does eventually end up going back to the small town, and then I kind of lost interest in her as well, because while that could have been an amazing part of the story to read about, to see what brought her back, did she now feel settled in this town, or did she always feel frustrated that she hadn't managed to escape? I wanted to get these feelings from her, and instead we just got bogged down in the details of her life. So I mentioned in Balancing the Books, there was a lot of her like going out and hunting nutria or swamp rats, and all the descriptions were very, very visceral, and I just didn't enjoy them. It was all a bit too gross for me. We're getting like a lot too much detail that I just didn't want to read. And so, yeah, I suddenly realised there's no point pushing me through reading this book at this stage. If I'm not invested in the characters at this stage, if I no longer really care what happens because I don't even understand what they think of each other or what they think of their situation anymore, there's no point me finishing it. And so I didn't. So there you go. I was mostly wrong about my 5-star predictions this time round, which is a shame. So now I need to come up with a new list of 5-star predictions and try and do it better. If you have any books that you predict would be 5 stars for me, let me know and I can check them out. And otherwise, I will see you guys soon. Here's my end screen.